Welcome to Tejal KHANDELWAL Study Center. Today's topic is Western political thought, Karl Marx. So let's revise Karl Marx together. Before understanding his salient thoughts and perspectives, let's have a historical background of his life. Karl Marx was born in Prussia in a Jewish family. He studied law, history, philosophy and got a doctorate in philosophy. He was attracted to socialism very early in his life, and because of his radical anti-state views, he was expelled from Prussia and forced to move to France. In France, he organized the workers, and there was a key pressure that had been created by the Prussian government. So he moved to Belgium. Then he moved to England in 1849, where he resided until his death in 1883. Karl Marx is truly the child of his times. If we look at 19th century Europe, the 19th century Europe had seen the rise of industrial revolution and the deteriorating conditions of the working class. It was based on the liberal philosophy of minimal state or laissez-faire and free market economy. It led to a lot of concentration of wealth and inequalities in society. It led to exploitative conditions of the working class. And that's why Karl Marx truly emerged as a revolutionary philosopher who revolutionized the entire societal conditions that emerged in Europe. He wanted to move and liberate mankind from the realm of necessity towards the realm of freedom. During his time, the concept of evolution was locked in air. So, like Hegel talked about the evolution of history, Darwin talked about the evolution of species in the sphere of science. Karl Marx talks about the evolution of society from ancient until the modern times. So, now let's see what has been the key thought of Karl Marx. He gives the materialist interpretation of history. What do we mean by a materialist interpretation? Plato says that there is a universal idea which forms the basis of knowledge. An idea is more important than the reality or the matter. On the other hand, Karl Marx says the basis of knowledge, idea, or consciousness is not mind, it is matter, which means for Marx, matter is primary and mind is secondary. And that's why we say that Marx is a materialist. He interprets history from economic terms, from materialist interpretation, from the conditions that shape man's consciousness or idea. He sought the human liberation from the realm of necessity towards freedom, which means in the capitalist conditions of society where there is ownership of the means of production by the haves, every man had to struggle for basic necessity. And this is the exploitative conditions of the capitalist society. So we have to move from the struggle of necessity towards a struggle of freedom where everyone's basic needs are met. He gives a critical analysis of the capitalist society, and this forms the basis of his anti-liberal philosophy. Capitalism is the economic counterpart of liberalism because liberalism in the economic sphere provides for a minimal state or a free market economy, and ownership of wealth has been justified by, or private property has been justified by all liberal thinkers on various grounds. Karl Marx questions this. He, in fact, questioned the whole of Western political thought, and that is where a new tradition or revolutionary philosophy comes within the realm of Western political thought. He talks towards a vision of society, which we call as communism, or which he calls as communism. However, communism is not something new in the modern times. In fact, it was Plato who spoke about communism of wives and property in ancient Greece. Marx brings communism in the modern light in order to bring a condition which will be classless as well as a stateless society. So, communism, according to him, is a realm, or it is that condition which will emerge after transitioning from socialism to a society which will liberate the whole of mankind from the exploitative conditions that are happening in the capitalist society. It is his vision of the future. But we do not see such kind of classless or stateless society coming into picture anywhere. His significance is because he questioned the whole tradition of the Western social and political thought, and he showed an alternative to the existing society in Europe. Now let's see the works of Karl Marx. Works of Marx can be seen in two aspects. One is works of young Marx and one is the works of old Marx. Young Marx is inspired a lot by socialism. He has a lot of attraction towards socialism. He also talks about human nature, which is very creative, which is very, man according to him is economic man. Man is also very social. And he talks about how production is an important activity which links man with his true human nature. Because in the act of production, man truly realizes his creative self. And in capitalism, there is dehumanization of this human nature, which means there is loss of self. The true aspect of human nature is lost. So young Marx talks about human nature, talks about what should be the moral basis of society, and the concept of alienation. Economic and philosophical manuscripts were written very much early but published after the death of Marx. And we also see the thesis of Feuerbach, which forms one of the keynotes of his work, The German Ideology. So young Marx focuses on alienation, human nature and morality. The old Marx becomes, or the mature Marx becomes more deterministic in his outlook, and he is striving to establish a future society which is known as communism, which is the stage that he says will come in the future society. So we see that in the Communist Manifesto, which was a manifesto that had been created for the workers in order to give them a clarion call to revolutionize, to unite, and to overthrow capitalism. So Communist Manifesto provides for the principles and program of action for the proletariat. We also see contribution to the critique of political economy, where he talks about the future communist society, and he says what should be the principle of distribution in such society. And the principle of distribution should be according to needs and not according to ability or work, which means the future communist society will ensure the basic needs of all individuals and not lead to exploitation of one man by another. Let's move towards the influences that have shaped Marx's thought. So, we know that Hegel has been one of the key contributors or well-known figures in German idealism. And Hegel adopts the dialectical method to propound his dialectical idealism. And he says that he applies the dialectical method in the realm of ideas, absolute spirit, or consciousness, or what he calls as even God. So he takes the dialectical method from in the sphere of the materialist interpretation, and he applies it to this materialist interpretation of history. So yes, from Hegel, he takes the dialectical method in this regard. And how Hegel applies dialectical method? To understand the movement of idea, similarly, Marx takes dialectical method and applies it to the movement of matter in history. He is also inspired by Feuerbach. Feuerbach says that man believes in God and religion and contributes his entire well-being or his entire potential to the spirit of God or religion. And that's why man is not able to realize his true self, because he believes too much or enshrines too much upon a divine force. Marx is inspired by this, and he says that how religion is opium of the masses and how it dulls the pain of the masses despite the pain which is caused by the capitalist class. So, Marx's materialist interpretation or materialism is inspired by Feuerbach, because Feuerbach focuses on the material aspect of reality, and that should be which should shape human nature. Then the German philosophy also inspires Marx. So yes, the Hegelian method of dialectics, how he applies it to the material world. He is also inspired by French political thought. So it is the French Revolution which leads to key ideas like equality and fraternity, which inspires Marx to a very large extent. And the English political economy. So Ricardo's labor theory of value, where he says that the value of good is proportional to the value contributed by the labor, the hours contributed by the labor. And it is this labor which is required to produce that good. Marx, inspired by this, then talks about the theory of surplus value and how in monopoly capitalism, the concentration of the surplus value is done by the bourgeois and not contributed or distributed amongst the workers. What is Marx's methodology? Marx's methodology is not merely based by an academic or a theoretical analysis. Marx's methodology is guided by a program of action. So, Marx says philosophers have interpreted the world. What matters is to change it. So, he says that any philosophy or any analysis, critical analysis of any phenomena should always be rooted in reality, and it should always provide for an objective way or path of action. So we say Marx's method is known as praxis, which means he always combines theory as well as action. And he uses inductive basis to formulate his theory, which means he looks at particular circumstances in the places that he lived, the situation and the experiences that he observed of the working classes, and draws a broad and general conclusion of entire history. So he is moving from particular to general idea. How is Marxism as an ideology? Marx says, all I know is that I am not a Marxist. So the term does not come in his entire life. In fact, it is Plekhanov who coins the term Marxism and says that Marxism is a whole worldview. In fact, Marx never claimed to offer a comprehensive worldview in that regard, even though it became a comprehensive view on various aspects of individual, society, economic condition, state, etc. Today, Marxism is an umbrella ideology because we also see post-Marxist developments that have happened, which means there have been many contributors who were inspired by Marx, who wanted revolution should occur in Europe, and however, they modified the principles of Marx to the specific situation in their own countries, like Lenin, like Stalin, like Mao. Now, so Karl Marx Marxism, he calls it as scientific socialism or communism. Now, why the term scientific socialism? What is the basis of calling it scientific? He calls it scientific socialism, firstly, to contrast it with the early socialist thinkers, who he calls as utopian socialist, which was Robert Owen, Charles Fourier, Saint Simon. These socialists only provided for analysis of the capitalist society, but they never provided a very strong alternative way of changing these circumstances, and whatever solutions they give were very idealist according to Marx. For Marx, it would not bring about a comprehensive change in the entire structure of society. So he calls them as utopian socialist and calls himself as a scientific socialist. So first, the term is in contrast, to contrast his own philosophy with the utopian socialist. And the reason of calling it scientific socialism is because he has applied the dialectical method towards the materialist interpretation of history, which means he applies the scientific laws derived from nature for the interpretation of history. So when we talk about his dialectical materialism, we'll see that how he talks about transformation from quantitative to qualitative, interpenetration of opposites, and negation of negation. These are the basis of scientific laws, and he applies that in order to arrive at his interpretation of history. That's why also he calls it as scientific socialism, which means he has predicted it on some laws, and he says what will also be the future because of this prediction. So yes, in this sense, he's also very deterministic. And the final future that he envisions in the world is going to be what? Which will be the last stage is communism, or a society which is classless as well as stateless. Now let's understand what is the difference between socialism and communism. See, socialism gives emphasis on equality as a key value. In socialism, there can also be socialism with existence of state. Socialism can also happen with respect to social ownership amongst various groups of society who organize themselves in such a way that profit can be distributed amongst the members of that organization. For example, cooperative societies. They are based on the principle of distribution of profits equally amongst all members of the society. This is also an example of socialism coming into practice. Socialism can also happen with a state. So the idea is social ownership and not ownership like it is happening in the capitalist society, where only few own it and give wages to the worker. Marx says that socialism in his concept or in his theory is a transition stage, which means his socialism that will be established after the occurrence of a revolution will be a transition stage. However, it will not end here. It will be leading to communism, which means a society where there is not social ownership, which means there is no existence of any class over there in communism. There is no existence of any state. Socialism as a principle to be applied can have existence of a state also. But in Marx's view, there cannot be a state if we want to have a very, utopian kind of society that he envisions for the future. Okay? So, in terms of socialism, for Marx, it is a transition stage. But he is not the only person who talks of socialism. We see that before Marx or the pre-Marxist socialist thinkers are also there. Like there is Robert Owen, like there is Charles Fourier. Some talk about right to work. Some talk about there should not be large industries, there should be small scale industries. There should be cooperative societies. There should be model communities. But Marx says that all these kind of thoughts are very minor modifications or bring only minor changes in society. So then he says that when capitalism will reach to its peak, which means when it will become truly very, very exploitative, and when the workers will understand this exploitation, they will revolt. They will bring a revolution and they will bring socialism as a condition where everything will be owned by the proletariat. But proletariat don't want to have, there is no conflict of the proletariat with respect to these means. So then they will give up their power and eventually establish a classless and a stateless society, which will be communism. Okay? So there is socialist strand in Marx's thought, but it doesn't end here. His socialism leads to communism. Okay? So things will be based on need, not based on work. And in capitalism, we know everything is based on ability. So from ability, it will move towards who will do how much work in socialism. And then, however, in communism, it will be based on need, which means even if a person is unable to work, obviously everybody will do voluntary labor, but at least he will not be deprived of the basic needs of his life. Okay? So there will be common ownership. The whole society will be owning things. And his entire concept of private property is not as how we understand it today. So people can have houses. That is not his idea of private property. His idea of private property is specifically how in capitalism people own property. So we may say that private property is understood as land or as having a house. So Marx doesn't have problem with ownership of a house. Marx has problem with ownership of the means of production, which leads to exploitation of one man by another. Now let's understand Marx's dialectical materialism. So, what is dialectical materialism? So, he is applying the dialectic methods, the laws of dialectics to interpretation, okay? Which means he will apply it, the dialectical method, to which aspect? He will apply it to matter. He will not apply dialectics to ideas like Hegel did it, okay? So, first, what kind of basis is dialectical materialism? Dialectical materialism is the philosophical basis, how we are arriving at a philosophy, the method, okay? So, it forms the philosophical basis of Marxism, all right? Now, so according to him, matter is the essence of the universe. What is the essence of universe according to Hegel? Ideas, consciousness, absolute spirit, or God, right? He uses those terms synonymously. But for Marx, it is what? It is matter which is primary, which means how is your material life? That shapes your mind, that shapes your consciousness. It is not vice versa. Your consciousness does not shape, which means, for example, if somebody is rich, they will look at the world differently. And if somebody is poor, they will look at the world differently. So it is their material condition which is shaping how they view the world, which is shaping their consciousness, which is shaping their ideas. Okay? So he says matter is primary and mind is secondary. Now, so it is this matter, okay, is the force behind all manifestations of social change. So only when you will change material conditions of people, their thinking will also change. Their life will also change. So for him, what is the most important aspect of human nature? Most important aspect of human nature is that man is social, man is economic man is creative, and man likes to see whatever he produces and associate with that product. Okay? And if you separate the individual or the human being from this entire product, the process of producing something, then that man becomes dehumanized. He does not remain his true human essence, which according to him happens where? In alienation. Okay? So he says matter is the essence of the universe and it is the force behind all manifestations of social change. So he talks of the laws of dialectics and he applies it. We'll see how. So first is transformation of quantity into quality. So what he says? He says change takes by quantitative transformation, right? Which means so there is like quantitative transformation. All the societal conditions are very different. And he says then there will be some sudden point where there will be a complete overhaul of the society. So for example, if we look at, in the capitalist society, or if we look at prior to the French Revolution, there have been so many inequalities that were prevailing. Suddenly, there was a change that came and it completely changed the values of the society. So he says, when the turning point will come, then all the quantitative changes, all the big ideas will transform and a qualitative aspect of society will be realized. So he says change happened suddenly. change happen through leaps and bounds. Okay, fine. So he talks about that turning point. So he says, progress of humanity is not affected by any gradual process of growth, but by sudden jumps. And he also associates, we can use it like example in science, right? So at 100 degrees Celsius, water turns into steam. And then at 0 degrees Celsius, it becomes ice. So it is just that turning point, okay, which brings about complete change from solid to gas. From liquid to gas and then to solid. Okay, so it is that turning point which brings about. So transformation of quantity into quality happens through this turning point. Second is interpenetration of opposites. So he says, everything has contradictions. However, in the contradictions, there is some sort of unity. Now let's see, for example, iron. Okay, it is very hard, but yet we can say it is something which can be molded to make something out of it. Okay, so it becomes hard, and when it is molded, which means it takes a softer form to get into a particular shape. Now he says that for example, he says everything in the world changes, but all these changes are not visible to us, okay? And it is this force of contradiction which is trying to bring change. So for example, the capitalist society may appear to you not very exploitative, but within it, underlying it, there is some sort of instability that is there. And then we'll see suddenly that there is a change that is coming. So he says contradiction, even in the contradictions, there is some sort of unity that can happen. Now, let's move towards so what is negation of negation? Which means everything has, stages of development. For example, thesis. Thesis contradiction is antithesis. And then comes synthesis. So, thesis to antithesis to synthesis. Do you think there is completely 3 different features that are happening? No. We see in synthesis, there are some features that are there of the thesis also, as well as some features of the antithesis also. Okay? So, this is the idea. So, from feudalism, we move towards capitalism. There will be certain things that will be carried. Then we move towards socialism. However, for Marx, society doesn't end here. He will say it is only in communism where stateless and classless society will take shape. Okay? So, it is forms or stages of development. Don't get too much confused about these things. Okay? It is this dialectical negation that he is talking of. Alright? Now, let's understand a very important concept which forms the basis of the entire Marxian thought. So, we are talking of historical materialism, and it is the Marxist interpretation of history. And history is moving not through ideas, but it is through matter. Now, let's see how. So, this will form the empirical or the scientific basis of Marxism. Okay? Now, so how it works? So, he says society is divided, right? How? In 2 ways. There is a base and there is a superstructure. Okay? What is there in base and what is there in superstructure? So, the intellectual force, the cultural force, the political forces are in the superstructure, and the base, that is economy, is the one which shapes everything. And how is the relationship between the base and superstructure? In fact, the superstructure is the base of the reflection. So it is not like an independent structure according to Marx. It is merely a mirror of the base. So how things are happening in the base means in the material conditions or in the production. That's how will happen in the legal sphere, in the intellectual sphere, in the cultural sphere, in the political sphere. Things don't operate independently in superstructure. Okay? So the structure of society is like that. So he says, what is this known as? The base, the economic aspect of life, is the mode of production. What are the ways that are happening in this mode of production? So there are forces of production, okay, and there are relations of production. Two aspects of mode of production. What is it? Forces of production, and how are the relations, okay? In forces of production, there are two things, that is means of production and labor power. So we have land, we have capital, we have machinery in the means of production, and there is labor power which shapes the product, crystallizes it. And there is relations of production. So he says, across history, like there is a primitive communism he talks about, where everything is equal and there is no division of society in this primitive communism. However, we see that as soon as the idea of division of labor starts, we see social formations. Okay, so the first ancient society, the slave owning society, what is the division in the society? There is a master and there is slave. In the feudal society, there is lord and the serf. So it is ancient, medieval and modern. Okay, so ancient society, slave owning society. Medieval society is feudal society, where the contending classes are lord and serf. And the capitalist society is the capitalist and the worker. Okay, so he says that as in the mode of production, these relationships of production depend on this, which means there is always conflict between classes, contending classes across all stages of history. That is master and slave, lord and serf, and capitalist and worker. So he says, across history, what has moved history? Conflict has moved history. Which means whenever there will be some technological change, okay, a new order is established, it is also exploitative only. Which means just the nature will change, but exploitation is always there, and conflict therefore always occurred across history. So history has been shaped by conflict in society, according to Marx. People don't cooperate. They always had a conflict. And therefore, there have always been what? Contending classes where conflict is the central feature. Okay? And these classes change as per changes in the technology and other things. Okay? So, in that way. So, as there is conflict we see in the relations of production, similarly, the superstructure is a reflection of the base. तो जैसे यहाँ पे conflict है, वहाँ पर भी वही चीज होगा. मतलब, in the superstructure, the people who own the means of production, right, they will always dominate. So there is always domination and the idea to overthrow this domination, which leads to class conflict. So that is, they will rule the law, they will rule the state, or they will shape the state. The state is also not independent because it is in superstructure and is merely a reflection of the base. The cultural also sphere they will dominate. How they will shape the idea of religion, and that will give reduce the pain of the masses. So he is saying superstructure is a reflection of the base. So it is always about class conflict in society. Okay, so his historical materialism, he is saying how across history, from time immemorial that he is tracing, there has always been class conflict, there have always been contending classes, and there have been certain people who own and certain people who dominate, and the others are being suppressed and they want to overthrow. Now, in the capitalist society, the worker realized there is consciousness which will happen very naturally because this system is very exploitative. And it will change to socialism and then to communism. Okay? Now, so yes, understood the relationship between base and structure. Okay? And across historical epochs, how there was earlier in the ancient times, the slave owning society, there was household based small scale production. However, emergence of private property happened and there was contending classes of master and slave. In the medieval times, large scale agriculture, so there is change in technology. Okay, there is large scale agriculture based production, so there is rise of feudalism and lord and serf, and then there is large scale machine based production due to the industrial revolution that has happened. Okay, now doctrine of the class conflict. So how does he explain the doctrine of the class conflict? See, we have to understand that historical materialism is inspired by the evolution. Okay, how, the concept of evolution was a lot in air that time. Everybody wanted to trace evolution of history or evolution of species, or Marx wanted to, talk about evolution of society. Okay, from and he wanted to shape it based on materialist interpretation, right? Now, when we talk about doctrine of class conflict, so let's understand what is this concept of class. See, class refers to a status, okay, that one person has with regard to another. Okay, now the basis of this status has different dimensions. So Weber says status is based on, political power. Okay, and Marx will say this status is based on economic power. Okay, so his concept of class is associated with economic aspect. Which aspect? Economic aspect. All right. So he says the division of society is into haves and have-nots. The haves are the dominant class and they have the tendency of suppression. The have-nots are the dependent class and they have the urge to overthrow. So what is the natural phenomena? Class conflict. One wants to dominate, other wants to overthrow. So it is class conflict. Okay. So the concept of class has to be understood. So he says, history of hitherto existing societies. How has history moved? It has moved always through this changes in society, in technology, and it has moved always through conflicts, class conflicts. Okay. So this is his idea about class conflict. Okay. So he says class symbolized collective unity. Each class produced its own ideas and beliefs. It operated within a particular economic and social system. It determined an individual consciousness as a member of a class. So what is your economic condition shapes your mental belief, shapes your mind, shapes your consciousness. Okay. Now, let's move towards the concept of surplus value. So how do we understand surplus value? Before that, what does Ricardo say? Ricardo say there are 4 factors of production: land, capital, labor, and enterprise. Okay, and we say that there are 2 kinds of capitals. One is a constant capital, which is raw material plus what you invest in machinery. And the other is the variable capital. What is this variable capital? Which means the product value is added by whom? By the labor. And labor is given what? Wages. But the finality in the product comes only through what? It comes through whatever labor the laborer puts in the product. Okay? So what is this surplus value? Surplus value is the value that has been produced by the worker minus its wages. If we have to understand it in layman terms, so whatever profit you are accruing in any product over its cost of production. For example, if I have to produce this pen, okay, the cost of production of this pen is 5 rupees, but that I'm selling it at 10 rupees. So that 5 rupees that has been a profit has come only not because of the constant capital, which means the 2 rupees that I have put in its raw material or the machinery that has gone to produce. But in the 3 rupees that I'm giving to the laborer, the wages, who really adds a lot of effort to produce this pen. Simply. तो जो प्रॉफिट है, जो capitalist is earning, it is coming because of the value that is being added by the labor power. And this labor power does not get any distribution of profits. He or she only gets some wages, which is so minimal. So what it leads to? It leads to accumulation of capital. And this accumulation of capital is reinvested by the capitalist and more profit is earned. When more and more profit is earned, still there is no redistribution. So surplus value is actually in fact the value which should have been redistributed. And why this wages do not increase? Because the labor doesn't have the power to bargain. If there are 5 companies which are producing this pen, there are 5 factories where this pen is being produced. I may go from factory A to B, okay? And there will not be any increase because there are only 5 factories which are producing this pen. And I don't have the option of exiting out of this factory system of production. I don't have options. What do? I cannot do my own enterprise as a laborer class. So I will be compelled to work. My bargaining power is lost. I don't have alternatives. So this bargaining power, when it is lost of the labor class across Europe, which happened, they migrated to urban areas. They were working in factories. They didn't have any other option because it was an industrial revolution phase. Okay. So what eventually led? It led to monopoly capitalism, which means few people, okay, own everything and how they are shaping things. And the laborer has no power to bargain. Neither he is getting any redistribution from what? From the surplus profit. Like today we see that companies are giving shares to their workers, right? Which means you are giving, if the company is doing well, they will do some set of share redistribution which is accrued out of the profit of the company. But that never happened in those ages. There was only wages that were given to the laborer and very difficult working condition. So surplus value is the way how labor class is exploited despite the value that they add to the product and make it profitable. Okay, and all this is accumulated by the owner, by the capitalist, by those who own the means of production. This is the idea. Okay, so it is the profit earned over the cost of production. It belongs to labor, because who made this pen truly so profitable? It is actually not, raw material cannot do anything on its own. It is not mobile that way. It is not creative. Machinery is not creative. Technology is not like that. It is only the labor who makes this pen, innovative, workable, good. Okay. So value in commodity is always by the labor. Okay. Now, cause of exploitation of the proletariat class, this surplus value. Capitalists reinvest surplus value. So there is monopoly capitalism where the laborer loses the power to bargain. So from one factory you will go to other, but you don't have the idea of overcoming this mode of production. Because in this mode of production, in this society, there is only ownership which is done by few, and the masses are exploited. That is his concept of private property. So when he says the term private property, it is in fact this capitalist society which owns the means of production. That is his concept of private property. And how this is leading only to exploitation of the whole society, the masses in the society. Okay? Now, let's talk about his theory of revolution. So, is Marx in favor of revolution? Yes. He is a thorough revolutionary thinker. He has radical ideas of bringing about change in society. Even violent means can be adopted, okay, right, in order to bring about change. So, we see that what is the philosophical basis? Radical idea. He gives a very solution that change can never happen through gradual means. Change happen only through turning point, where there will be transformation quantitative to qualitative. So things will accumulate. And then this one turning point will change the whole structure, establish a new social order. So yes, his idea is radical. And what kind of change he wants? He wants a comprehensive change. He wants change in the economic structure, and he wants change even in the superstructure. So he wants social, economic, political, comprehensive change. Okay. Now, what is the context? Obviously, it is because of the advanced industrial production that he is talking. Conflict between capitalists and the workers. Cause of revolution is sense of, obviously, injustice that is prayer, which means the consciousness of the proletariat will awaken on its own because of the exploitation that they go through. They will themselves realize that whom the capitalist is exploiting them. Okay? So, what impact it will have? It will have a new age of social progress. And is revolution desirable for Marx? Yes, revolution is desirable. He wants revolution to come. And that's how he has predicted things also. Did Aristotle want revolution? No. Aristotle was a status quoist. He never wanted revolution. Now, one important concept is work of young Marx, that is alienation. Okay. So it is in EPM, very much early economic and philosophical manuscripts, which was published very much later after his death. He talks about alienation. Now, how do we understand this alienation? Alienation क्या होता है? I am a human. Okay? Human being. I have a human essence. What is my human essence? Which means I am social, I am creative, and I like to do things in a more subjective manner. Which means whatever I will produce, anything that I will produce. Okay, production is a very important activity for Marx. So when I produce anything, when I create anything, I want it to be saying that this is mine. I have produced it. This is my work. It will give me a sense of achievement. This is the basic human essence. Every individual wants to be associated with whatever work they do or whatever production they are doing of anything. Be it a painting, be it fishing, any activity. Okay? So this is human nature. What is alienation? Alienation, which means you are separated from this human nature. The human essence you have, which is creative, social, and you want to possess your work or product, there is dehumanization, मतलब loss of self. तो असलियत जो इंसान का basic nature है वो ही उससे अलग हो जाता है. That's why they say alienation in simple terms means separation. किससे separation है? अपने आप से. क्योंकि अपने आप क्या समझता है मार्क्स? अपने आप human being is what? Creative. Okay? So alienation for him occurs in a capitalist society. Why? Because man is separated from his own self. There is loss of self. There is dehumanization. Human has a way of doing things. ये completely reverse हो जाएगा. That person will not be person. It will become a robot in this entire capitalist society. Capitalist will also become robot. And the laborer will also become robot. Fine. So he says, it is against nature of a human being. Separation from oneself. So there is separation from you, your own human nature. Separation from the product, because you don't know which part of the product. Now this watch, if I am doing an assembly line of production, I don't know which aspect of this watch I have contributed to, right? Because I cannot say for years that I have produced this fossil watch. Alright. There is no aspect or innovation that has been coming in this production. I am merely maybe just attaching the belt. Okay. Now, if I don't attach it in fossil, I might attach it in Titan. I might attach it in Tissot. But do I say that this is completely my thought process? You cannot possess it. Right? So alienation is dehumanization, it is loss of self. So it happens, it goes against the nature of human being. Man is separated even from the product. Man is separated from the fellow workers. Why? Because everybody is doing one kind of task that they are assigned. There is no interaction. We are not sitting together to brainstorm how this watch has to be produced. There is a fixed line of how this watch has to be produced. Some worker is doing something, another worker is doing. They don't have very healthy relation because there's long working hours. And from society, because you don't like to attend festivals, you cannot do painting after a 9 hours work. You cannot go fishing. You cannot enjoy life, which is your essential nature. So in alienation, which happens in this capitalist society, man is separated from his own nature. तो नेचर मतलब वो वाला नेचर नहीं, नेचर मतलब एसेंस ऑफ ह्यूमन बीइंग, उसी से वो अलग हो जाता है. ठीक है? फ्रॉम द प्रोडक्ट, फ्रॉम द प्रोसेस, फ्रॉम फेलो वर्कर्स एंड फ्रॉम द सोसाइटी एट लार्ज, फ्रॉम एंटायर ह्यूमैनिटी. दैट इज एलियनेशन. ओके? So who faces alienation? Both laborer and capitalist. Why alienation? Because production becomes forceful. To live your life you have to do. Earning के लिए करना पड़ता है. Demand और supply के हिसाब से work कर रहा है. Maybe I don't want to work in a watch factory. But if I'm located in an urban area where only the factories are making watches, I don't have option to migrate. Right? So it is based on the prices, the demand, the market forces, and not what I voluntarily want to do. It is a coercive activity. It is not voluntary activity. Okay? So how to solve the problem of alienation is abolition of capitalism and establishment of communism. So communism mein he says man can do everything. He can be a doctor, He can be an artist, he can be a painter, he can do multiple things at a time. Because he doesn't have to work 9 hours, radically. He can go for 5 hours to become a doctor. Then he can become, a painter, or he can be, singing in a chorus. So man enjoys life. But how we see in the capitalist world, everybody is running, competition, innovation. So man is obviously alienated. This is the depth of the concept of alienation. Okay, fine. Now, so freedom. Now, what is freedom and what is Marx's vision of freedom? See, understand. Freedom is the most broadest concept. Okay, which means freedom means self-realization. Every human being moves towards self-realization. That is freedom. Okay. Liberty is the liberal view of freedom. According to liberals, liberty is the key value that has to guide the society, that has to guide the individual, and that has to guide public policy and the state. And what is liberty? That state will not interfere in what? In the economic activities of the individual. Or the state will not create any barriers which will inhibit an individual's human development. तो इंसान को फ्रीडम दे दो, वो अपने आप में मेरिटोरियस इंडिविजुअल है, उसको जो करना है करने दो. डोंट इंटरफियर. स्टेट शुड नॉट इंटरफियर. स्टेट ने सिर्फ इंसान की सिक्योरिटी प्रोटेक्ट कर लेनी है और कोई भी काम दूसरा स्टेट नहीं करेगा. वो इंडिविजुअल अपने आप इतना मेरिटोरियस है कि वो कर लेगा. That is a liberal view. So for them, liberty is the basis of freedom. Marx say this is very narrow understanding. This is making man an atomistic man, right? And you are not talking about that every individual only by not interfering in their choices is not true freedom. True freedom is when man doesn't have to worry about basic needs of life. He doesn't have to worry whether tomorrow he will get food or no if he don't go to work. So the real realm of freedom is where you have overcome the problem of necessity. So what is more important? Not only political rights, it is also economic rights. It is economic aspect of your life, which should not be based on, how the market is working, whether demand supply basis, no. So for him, freedom is everybody should have opportunities. Everybody's basic necessities have to be met. That is true freedom. You overcome the issue of necessities. Economic aspect is very important aspect. Not like minimal state or liberal talking about, everybody who put labor in a property can, justifiably own that property. No. For Marx, it is not like that. And it can never happen in this capitalist society. Freedom will be only in communist society. जब सबकी needs का common ownership, society as a whole owns things. Okay? So it is not atomistic basis. He gives a humanist basis because everyone's needs are met. He says freedom is material, what? Means of satisfaction of wants and opportunity for self-development. And transformation of capitalist system itself to secure conditions of freedom. So freedom comes when we overcome the problem of necessity. Okay? Now with respect to state. So does he, since beginning, he is not very favorable to the concept of state. Okay? Now, why? Where is state located for Marx? State is located in the superstructure. Political aspect है. तो state क्या है? Reflection है. किसका reflection है? Base का. Base में क्या है? Class conflict है. Base में क्या है? One is dominating, other wants to overthrow. Conflicting classes. ऊपर भी वही होगा. तो जो dominate base को कर रहे हैं, वो कहाँ करेंगे domination? Superstructure में भी करेंगे. तो द स्टेट में जो लोग हैं, स्टेट की जो अथॉरिटीज हैं, वो क्या है? दे आर द एग्जीक्यूटिव कमिटी ऑफ द बुर्जुआजी. State is the executive committee of bourgeoisie, which means those who dominate economic structure, they only shape the laws, they only shape the political aspect, they only shape the other aspects of society. Okay, so he says it is the instrument of the dominant economic class. Law, government, bureaucracy, everybody works to their favor. Okay, so just example, there is a key capitalist class in our society. Okay, we are not a very advanced industrial society today, maybe in some aspects, but agriculture is also there. So imagine Europe, है ना? तो imagine the two key economic groups and they tell the Modi government what to do and what not to do. That is what Marx is trying to say. Okay, so it is in the realm of superstructure, executive committee of the bourgeoisie. Therefore, he talks of a stateless society. He talks of communism. So for him, the instrumentalist view of Marx is actually about state reflection of base in the superstructure. There is also one more view in Marx's writing, which is not very crystallized, not very famous, but we can, trace the origins of this view. That is Bonapartism, where he says when the executive becomes too strong, not any one particular class will be able to dominate. So state will operate more independently in Bonapartist. So here we originate Marx's contribution to talking of relative autonomy also. That we will see in detail when we will do the theory of state. Okay? Now, so Asiatic mode of production is a term he specifically uses for the colonies, and he says that here what is not very well crystallized, it is about the non-European world. That's why the term Asiatic mode of production. He's talking of Asiatic society. So he says they are very backward civilizations, okay? And in this sense, like India, China, Hegel is pointing, okay, that they did not have any history and they were stationary and fixed, okay? So Marx says imperialist rule is constructive as well as destructive for them, for these societies, yes, Oriental societies, which are incapable of change and there is stagnation here. Now, how it is constructive and how it is destructive, okay? So he says it is destructive because it destroyed indigenous institutions and practices. And it is constructive because it created modern techniques. So for example, railways, okay, communication, industrial way of, establishing factories, right? Who did this? The British have done by establishing a colony here. So it is bringing certain modern things. However, it is also destructive because it has reduced. But he says change will come only through socialism, even in these societies. So he says, however, obviously there is absence of private property because you know how he associate the terms private property, the capitalist mode of production. So he says it is here there is also overdeveloped state, okay, because state was, unlike Europe, where state was an instrument, okay, of the class domination, state in Asiatic societies controlled all classes. So the concept of overdeveloped state. Why? Because, we see how the bureaucracy was very, very strong, how the British exploited. Okay. Now, so it is only socialism which will precede what? National liberation movement. So we can say that Bhagat Singh and others also form the basis of incipient socialism. They say there is also the economic critique that has been offered, right, in nationalism. Hai na? Now, on religion. So yes, inspired by Feuerbach only. He says religion is opium of the masses. What does opium mean here? Which means it will dull the pain. It will obviate the pain of the masses. So how? the masses will be taught, religion will give them hope that things will change. Why? Because what will religion say? Whatever you have done is result of your past actions. So all the onus of your exploitation is in your own karma. You must have done something wrong. That's why, you are probably poor and another person is rich. That's what religion teaches the mankind in the Marxian concept. So, somebody who is in the exploitative state will never want to change the society because he feels change will come only from the liberating force of God. Okay? So, that's why religion will dilute the pain of the mass. Now, so they will never challenge the capitalist who has created this system which is exploitative. And obviously, that's how this is problematic. Okay? So, it is a mechanism of social control and it creates illusion. It eases the pain produced by capitalists. So, people will relate everything to God. Now, there are critiques of Marx as well as defenders of Marx. Okay? So, we have Max Weber, who says that history is not necessarily working through, only the materialist interpretation. So, he's only given class conflict as a feature, which is only for Weber. He says Marx is giving a monocausal theory of change. Alright? And Marx overlooks the emergence of the middle class. So, Weber's criticized socialism because for its attempt to replace anarchy of the market and achieve greater equity through planning. Karl Popper calls him the enemy of open society. Fine. Edward Bernstein questioned the possibility of revolution in Western societies because peaceful road towards socialism has been parliamentary methods, bringing in welfare state also comes into some practices before the establishment of welfare state also is there. Now, Habermas calls Marxism as discourse in exile and rejected the utopian vision of Marx. Okay, Anthony Giddens criticized Marx's way of history. Berlin rejected the deterministic and outlook of Marxism because everything is, economic basis, economic determinism is there in Marx. Right? So, there are also defenders of Marx, Maurice Comfort, Professor Maxey, Gray, Lloyd, they have all spoken that how he talks of class struggle, how he talks of the importance of economics, which is there even today. So, we will see across the spectrum division of criticism as well as defenders of Marx. Okay, but however, we know that his contribution has been exemplary, even if today there is a strong challenge that comes to liberal philosophy or the capitalist basis that comes from the root that Marx has laid down, right? And that regenerates the thinking of challenging the basis of the liberal system. Okay, I hope Marx is clear now. It was a very comprehensive session. Any other doubt you can post in the comments or ask me. Okay, thank you.